Wolfpack Nation, we are back once again. First of all, if you haven't checked out part 1 of our interview with Joe Giglio yet, make sure to go check that out. Is again, this conversation you're about to hear is basically a exact continuance from part 1. So it is basically a must. So you have to watch part 1 first to really understand how we got to this point here. So make sure to go check that out first. And again, first of all, again, thanks to Joe again for joining us here again. This has been a fun conversation so far, and I'm pumped for part 2 here. So so again, first of all, just a quick reminder again: hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and give us a follow. Tuffy Talk Now on Twitter or Instagram. And obviously, if you're not already following Joe and Joe Giglio and Joe Ovies, I mean, I don't know what you're doing, but again, those guys are hilarious and a fun time to listen to. So make sure to do that. But Michael, so you asked a question. I had to put the timeout for maybe one of the first times ever in Tuffy Talk history, because at some point we had to end part 1. So, but if you wouldn't mind, Michael, again, asking your question, and then we'll jump right back into it.
Yeah, so we were talking about how ESPN and Fox are driving these changes. And so wouldn't it be in ESPN's interest to support the ACC because of the ACC network and the partnership there? Or is that just peanuts compared to the SEC?
I think ESPN wants to support the ACC to a point and at a cost. Yeah. We talked previously about some of the smaller schools in the ACC, and I think that's the biggest problem for the ACC. We can talk around in circles about Miami and Virginia Tech and heck, even State in North Carolina not being able to mount serious national programs on a consistent basis. But ultimately, when you look at the composition of the league, and I looked up these numbers today for the OG, and it's just like a snapshot. But if you think about it, if you just go by stadium size, right? And yeah, there can be some flaws in there. USC and UCLA would be on the top of the flawed list, but for the most part, if you look at the schools who have the biggest college football stadiums, we could correlate that with interest, right? That's fair. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a mathematician or an economist, but seems kind of fair to me.
Yeah.
The top, there are 8 stadiums in college football that hold more than 100,000 people. The top 3 are all Big Ten schools. 4 of those 8 are Big Ten schools. The other 3 are current SEC members. The 4th is Texas, who will be an SEC member. 100,000. That's significant. You mentioned Ohio State before and their undergrad enrollment. The highest, the biggest stadium in the ACC is Clemson at 81,000. Nothing to sneeze at, but still,
it's a big drop off, though. It's a big drop off, 20,000.
But still, 20,000 fewer.
Right.
FSU's right there, 79.5. VT 65.
Yeah.
Okay. I think State and Carolina right there in that comfortable middle there. Then you get to the bottom, the literal bottom of Power 5. Boston College, 44,000. Duke, 40,000. Wake Forest, the smallest venue in all of division of the Power 5, 31,000.
Yep. Yeah. There's
really?
There's a group of 5 stadiums that are bigger than that. A lot of them.
Didn't realize it.
Sure. And I'm not. You mentioned before, Wake Forest has an undergrad enrollment of 4,000 or whatever it is. So you just have a conference with some private schools. Duke and Wake, obviously original members of the ACC, and obviously have value. And Wake Forest is fine in football, but their following is,
it
is what it is.
Terrible.
So,
like literally, Joe, we actually reached out. We actually have been trying to reach out to like podcasts for other teams to kind of talk football during the season, and Wake Forest literally doesn't have one besides the one that's with 247. They literally don't have any other podcast or anything like that, which is baffling to me. So, but yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
There are plenty of passionate Wake Forest fans. They found my Twitter timeline this year when I tried to explain to them they weren't going to make the NCAA tournament with their non-conference strength of schedule, which was funny when we saw Steve Forbes at the Final Four, and he was like, yeah, man, I mean, you were right.
They didn't get in.
Which are my favorite words. No, but to me, that's the flaw of the ACC is its composition. And if you're going to have 3 teams at the bottom, I always kind of count Pitt as a half in there. I know Pitt has an unbelievable tradition, but they play in an NFL stadium that basically is half full.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not knocking. They have an unbelievable tradition. Like if you were going to pick a starting 11 from only one school, Pitt would be
100%.
Pitt would be. You would be. If you knew anything about the history of college football, you'd put Pitt ahead of Alabama. Even like they have that. Their players are that good historically.
Yep.
But that doesn't
Modern
translate to especially in the ACC, as you mentioned before, Michael. Pitt West Virginia. That's a great rivalry. Pitt Penn State. That's a great rivalry. But they have Syracuse, Boston College. It doesn't exactly move the needle. So anyway, in my opinion, that's the biggest problem. It's the math of the ACC. And if you're gonna now look at the Big Ten, they have one private school, so you can offset. The Big Ten could offset 3 really small schools, but they don't because the name of the conference is the Big Ten for a reason because they're all gigantic public university schools. The SEC has the advantage of Arkansas doesn't have Ohio State or Indiana's huge enrollment. But do you know what else isn't in the state of Arkansas? A professional franchise. School? There's no NFL team, NBA team, Major League Baseball team. The University of Arkansas, that's the show, man. And you think about that in the ACC. You go through the states and you're going, what are the equivalents that the ACC has of that?
It helps that they got Jerry Jones too.
Not a lot. They do. Yeah. They have certain advantages. Don't get me wrong. But the SEC has that advantage of if you're not in this major market, you're in a state where you literally are the biggest deal. Alabama, LSU, LSU, of course, the Saints, but LSU, we're not going to sit here and argue with the brand or fan interest in LSU. So to me,
they're in that
Nebraska
bubble.
in that bubble.
They're the largest city in Nebraska when there's a home football game.
Yeah. Nebraska's another tradition. Now that they can't get out of their own way. There's probably some comparisons between Nebraska and Florida State. But there's no other. I mean, think about Florida State. They're competing with Miami and Florida, and not to mention UCF and anyone else. But Nebraska's the only show in town. And that's kind of where the ACC gets into trouble, in my opinion. And that's where ESPN says to you, well, what do you have? And you can start at Clemson football. Yeah, that's great. And you're going, cool. Then Florida State. And then you're like, well, they're kind of a mess. And then Miami, kind of a mess. But they're also a small private school too. And then you're like, well, we have like Virginia Tech and NC State and Louisville, who I think you could all put in the same
tier 2
area. Yeah. And you go, those are good. Those are really good. But Virginia Tech, there's Virginia. Louisville, there's Kentucky. State, there's Carolina. So you're kind of in this situation where you're like, what do you really have? And that to me fundamentally is
I got one quick question before we jump into our season preview for State. How awkward is it going to be for the media days for ACC football here in a couple of weeks? Because I mean, I feel like I mean, it's like you're going to have to address every coach and of course the commissioner is going to have to address the elephant in the room. So I mean, that should just be part of their 5-minute speech. It's like this is where we stand now. Let's talk football. Like because every media, and you guys have to do your job, obviously. Yeah. But I mean, you guys are just going to rotate from that question. Like one guy takes it for one coach, the next media guy takes it for the next coach. Like, how's that going to work for you guys?
I feel like when you do the radio stuff, like we did this in the Final Four at Radio Row, the coach would literally sit down and you'd get 2 or 3 minutes before you went on the air, and I would say to them, basically, "Are you okay if I give you a hard time?" I remember Brad Underwood. He's at Illinois now, right? I said to him, "I go, are you?" And we never met. This it was like speed dating, and I was basically like, "Are you okay if we give you a hard time?" And he was
Who
like,
are you?
Sure. Like, what do you mean? And I was like, I'm like, dude, you ruined my bracket something fierce last year, and I cannot forgive you. And he was like, oh, you're one of those. And I was like, yes. I said, but you did pick me up with Stephen F. Austin a couple of years ago. And he was like, okay, all right, I'll allow this. Like, but you give him a heads up. Now, the coach from Texas, Chris Beard, we didn't have a chance to kind of get a little pre-warmer in there, and he was not happy when he sat down and started talking to us. So it'll be the same in Charlotte. And obviously we know all of the coaches except maybe the Florida State guy at this point. I don't really know him, but Dave Clawson, Dave Doran, Mac Brown,
Mike Norvell.
Even Mike Elko, we've had on the show and some other stuff. So
right.
Okay.
It'll be, but people don't like it when I ask them questions because I don't want to sit there and tell you how great you are. That's
fair.
That's kind of who I am.
Gotta have it both ways.
Yep. No, absolutely. And then the one thing which I wanted to mention too, Joe, I mentioned that I was going to bring up in between parts before we get into football is so my wife, she's a South Carolina Gamecock graduate for undergrad, and so the one thing that they do have is my money, so that's enough for me. So, but the one thing which I always give her, I give her lovingly crap, not to say crap, I just remind her. But I give every other South Carolina fan crap is that literally the biggest person that you look at is like all praise thee is Steve Spurrier. Like you had like literally a Steve Spurrier that was as tall as your stadium on the side of your stadium. And literally the moment that he stopped, he went right to Florida and then didn't even look back at you. Like, and you still like look at him and like, that's why I'm saying like to me, South Carolina shouldn't even yeah, thank you, Steve. Appreciate what you did. Like, and that's it. Like, because at the end of the day, again, it's not like he's giving you anything in return. He's all Florida. Like he doesn't even think about South Carolina now. So before we continue, I want to take a quick second to tell you about our sponsor, Flatlands Jessup Insurance Group, that has your whole world covered, with agents in 5 offices throughout Eastern North Carolina to help you decide how much coverage you need, offering policies for home and auto, recreational vehicles, commercial, crop, health, life, and employee benefits. They are able to combine options to find a comprehensive solution that works for you. Flatlands Jessup protects the things you love so you can spend less time worrying and more time enjoying them. Find them on Facebook and Instagram at Flatlands Jessup. You can also visit their webpage at www.flatlandsjessup.com. So please make sure to go and check them out. And so looking at this season and looking at this team, I mean, obviously, you lose, Ike Ekwonu, you lose Emeka Emezi. You pretty much get your whole defense back for the most part, besides really Daniel Joseph. It really just comes down to the one question I think that we really have is, well, the one main question is running back. And then basically, how does the pieces come together with the offensive line? But I think that, honestly, to me, one of the biggest wins this offseason, honestly, was Chandler Zavala getting announced that he's coming back. I think that was a huge, probably one of the biggest wins this offseason to get him back. So, I mean, I think we've actually asked this question before, but I'll kind of ask it to you. So if State, let's say that there's kind of a range in terms of how bad State might do, how good State might do. If they end up being as bad as you may expect, what would you say the reason would be for it?
Did you say if they're as good as we would expect?
Like if they're as bad, so let's say like the worst that you might think they go is 6-6. Why would you think that they would fall apart, or why would you think they would get that low?
Yeah, you even think that's too low? Because when you said 6-6, that look was like way 6-6.
Anything
worst case scenario.
I would be stunned if they went 8-4. I would be stunned. If they went 8-4, there was probably an injury. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if Devin gets hurt, maybe it is worse than 8-4. But that's about where it is, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So if we stay healthy, where do you project? Like
I don't think they're going to win at Clemson. I don't. And then covering the team as long as I have, there's probably a dumb one in there. And
yeah.
As long as we've all been covering it, Joe.
And now dumb could be subjective in this case. Like, is Florida State finally going to be better? Is Louisville? Louisville's the one I have circled. It's before the Carolina game. I actually think that guy's a really good coach. But I mean, he was good for 1 year and he was just okay last year. So it'll be interesting to see what they look like by that time of the year. But I think you're spot on. I think there are questions on the offensive line. Getting Zavala back is a help. I think they're going to have to prove they can run the football. I don't know if Jordan Houston is that guy. So that's going to be an interesting. I thought they were going to go into the portal and get a running back. I was surprised that they didn't. which probably tells us what we need to know about the Sumo kid, that he probably is pretty good.
Right.
And they've been talking him up, but as much as you could talk up someone we've never seen run the football before. So
exactly.
I think Devin will be great. I think the defense is the defense is an interesting challenge. I can't imagine Isaiah Moore is ready from the jump. That's kind of asking a lot. I think Drake Thomas really blossomed when he was moved to the mic. I think you have to keep Drake at the mic, which I would assume is the plan. And then you have to figure out, how do you get Isaiah in there? How do you get Peyton in there so they're true difference makers? I have a soft spot for Isaiah Moore. I love the way that he plays the game. I love his attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought when Peyton went out last year, Isaiah Moore really was the first one to be like, you know what? We really freaking needed him, but someone has to step up their game, and he did. Yeah. And then for him to get hurt in that Miami game, it was like, that hurt, obviously, the team. And to see Drake then fill in the way that he did was remarkable. But sometimes, guys, you could see this where maybe even in basketball, right? Or even in baseball. But let's use basketball. Somebody averages 20 points a game, and then they go out. Then all of a sudden, instead of one guy averaging 20, you get three that average 15, 14. And you're going, wait a second, those guys were all pretty good in different roles. But how will they look when they're all on the field together? Yeah. There's a challenge to that. Now, it's football, and the good news is they're on the defensive side, so you don't have to share a ball. You just have to make plays. Mm-hmm. And I think Peyton can do that. I want to see Peyton stay healthy. I think everybody wants to see Peyton, for his own sake, stay healthy.
Yes.
But I think he's a true difference maker. I think Isaiah is a true difference maker. And I think Drake is a true difference maker. That's how you win games. You have true difference makers. In the secondary, I think there are some pieces there. It's better than it was in 2017. I don't think they have a Bradley Chubb. I don't think they have a Naheem Hines. I don't think they have a J. Sam. But I do think this is a deeper team, 1 through 40. The question is, can all of those parts exist on defense in such a way? Now, let's remember, I think NC State's defense was very good. But, Miami chewed them up. Mississippi State chewed them up. And, even Carolina at the end of the year there kind of did what they wanted to do. So it's going to be interesting. And Wake Forest, obviously, in the game that determined the Atlantic Division, right?
That was the worst one.
So you want to see NC State. And you have to understand, too, like, defense is relative now. A dominant defense is relative. It truly is one guy making 2 or 3 plays in a game. Vi Jones last year was a guy who would make a couple of plays, and you're like, man, you lose the game if that guy doesn't make that play. So that's the challenge for NC State. Can you win games defensively? It's hard to do in 2022. Alabama doesn't win games defensively anymore. Georgia did last year. How many of those freaking guys were drafted, though? And I like all of these guys I just mentioned. But quite frankly, if they were NFL players, they'd be in the NFL. So, you also have to look at it that way. But I think the schedule, we're going to talk next year, I'm guessing, again, guys. And I'm telling you right now, the schedule next year,
not easy.
Brutal.
It's really difficult. Particularly
brutal.
You think about
Notre Dame.
But exciting.
No, definitely exciting. But it's in a way that you're like, we talked before about bad timing of trying to get Oklahoma and Texas in the ACC. State's going to be rebuilding next year and playing the toughest schedule I can remember them having. This year, though, this is a trade you make. This year's schedule is one of the easiest that I've ever seen them have. So to answer your question, I definitely think they could win every game they play this year. I do. Honestly, I do. I think they have a puncher's chance to win every game they play. I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
But I think they probably go 7-1, 6-2 in the league, 10-2 overall. That would be my guess. 10-2 would be my guess.
Okay.
I think it's Louisville. Louisville's the one that I think they'll be locked in for Carolina. They always are.
Yeah.
But I just think you look at the schedule and you go, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's just you try to find the trap there. You try to find the pitfall. And I think all those guys came back for a reason. That's a great thing. And I love that Dave has already talked about, hey, these are the problems Carolina had in a similar situation last year. You can't fall into that trap either. So it's great to acknowledge all of those things, but you also acknowledge too, like you said, a program that hasn't won the ACC title since 1979. How amazing would it be if you were the group that delivered that title? And that's a real carrot out there for those players, and they're older. Let's be honest too. These are a lot of this is a COVID year of eligibility that wasn't given to other groups. You know, how many times have you heard, oh, if Phillip Rivers redshirted and got to play with the number one defense, and it's like, guys, that was never even an option. Okay, like
he was your best option.
Never a realistic thing, but this is realistic, and all you have to do is look at Pitt and Wake Forest last year. They benefited greatly from that extra year of eligibility for some of their older players. And I think State did too, and I think they can again this year with a little bit of health. Like State wasn't healthy at all for long stretches. Let's go back the last 2 years. You know, Devin getting hurt against Duke, or all of the COVID issues to start that season. So if you're this group and you've been successful the last 2 years, which they have been, you have to look at this and go, what's in our way? What's truly in our way? You know, you did beat Clemson last year, so it's going to take everything you got to beat them down there for sure.
Sure.
But I'm just saying 10-2 as someone who's, you know, followed the program. I'm not saying that as I think 11-1 is realistic, and I think it's realistic that they could win every game. You said what's the worst case? I do think 8-4 is probably your worst case. You drop one or two you probably didn't expect. And then those happen.
Yeah.
Those happen.
Speaking of that, what are your thoughts on the ECU game? First game of the season. On paper, NC State should win this game, no problems. But, you know, first game of the season, and it'll be a rowdy environment in Greenville.
Yeah.
So
I was there in 2016 when NC State had 14 future NFL players, and ECU had Scotty Montgomery, and NC State lost in easily the lowest point of Dave Doran's tenure.
Yeah.
I think State will win in Greenville. They might not cover, but I think they'll probably. I would be surprised if they lost. I would be. I'd be genuinely surprised.
Yeah.
Last question for me. Before I know we're going to wrap this up here in just a few minutes, but where do you place Devin Leary in the ACC quarterback conversation, and then where do you place him in the potential Heisman Trophy race? Because there's, you know, obviously State has an unofficial campaign for Heisman for Leary, but what are your thoughts there?
Heisman's so tough. I mean, it's really just about exposure and having your moment. But anybody can, in theory, anybody can have a Heisman moment. Yeah. I love Devin's arm. I love his tenacity, his attitude. These are all good things. I've made the point on the air before that nationally people, or even in regionally, people tend to overlook Devin because he plays a traditional quarterback style. He doesn't run. So, you know, now we're like, oh, if you're not Cam Newton, Robert Griffin III, Tim Tebow, whoever, if you don't have 20 rushing touchdowns and you know, Lamar Jackson, then you're not a good quarterback. And that's not true. It's just not true. The kid at Alabama doesn't run at all. I mean, he's just won the Heisman. So I think Devin has a real chance to have a really special season, and I would hope that it works out that way for him.
Same here. Well, thank you so much again, Joe. I really do appreciate you coming on again. I think this has been an absolute blast, and I'm all down for making this a yearly thing. And but the one kind of, I guess, asterisk I'll put on that statement is if State wins it all this year, then we got to have you back on to review that season for sure.
Oh, for sure.
We're gonna be partying. We're gonna be partying for years, just on that one AC championship. If we could pull this thing off. So, but thank.
I actually did have one last comment.
Go ahead.
How do we start a campaign to get the yellow pad in like the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame? Because I think it's got its place.
For sure.
I'll have to work on it. Appreciate you guys.
All right.
Good. Absolutely. Well, again, for anybody who's watching or tuning in, make sure again if you're not already following Joe Giglio and Joe Obies, make sure to go do that on the OG again. It's just great content, great stuff, a lot of fun to listen to. Anything else, Joe, that you want to plug in?
No, we're actually gonna do something at Carter Finley Stadium, or at least around Carter Finley Stadium, that you guys are all going to enjoy greatly. That may involve some other people and a certain ceremony. So you're going to enjoy that on the social media. So look forward to that.
Certain ceremony. Okay, interesting. All right then. All right. Well, with that being said, we're gonna tease the crap out of that and hold it right there. So thank you all so much again for tuning in. Make sure again hit that subscribe button if you don't mind, so that way you don't miss out whenever we release any new NC State content. Give this video a like, so that way YouTube will put this video in front of more NC State fans, and also give us a follow Tuffy Talk now on Twitter and Instagram. But thank you all so much for tuning in with us, and as always, go back, baby.